Thank you for being here to this screening of Aram here in Glendale today. I'm Salpi Ghazarian, Director of the Institute of Armenian Studies at USC. And here with me are Chris Chambers, the writer-director of the film Aram, and Ara Arzumanian, who is an educator. Yes, absolutely well-deserved. Thank you. As I said, we're from the Institute of Armenian Studies, and Armenian Studies doesn't usually cover this. And yet, I think that where immigration is so different now, where identity issues are so different now, this really is an aspect of our everyday reality. And what I really want to do in the little time that we have is to talk about some of the myths behind this. One of the myths, of course, is that this can't be a kid from Beirut, that Chris somehow messed up, right? He should have found a kid from Yerevani Yerortmas, right? Ara, what's your experience?
You know, it's very interesting. So I've worked in the Armenian community in youth work and working with kids, quote unquote, at-risk youth for a while. And that is the impression that I always run into when you're talking to someone who's not in kind of this field or in this life or has any experience with youth facing these types of issues. Whatever their nation of origin is, they assume the kids are from the other two major. So if they're Arab Matahai, then it's Hayastansi Parskahai kids. If they're, Parskahai, then it's Hayastansi and Arab Matahai. Like basically it's everyone except you is the thing. In my experience, Armenian kids, regardless of their nation of origin, are facing these risk factors and are involved in, these types of things. And the even more interesting thing is that you see kids that are kind of like in a gangish, I mean, this, and I gotta say, one of the things that you really, really got right, which you got everything right from what I saw, was that
Armenians don't usually say that, Chris. That's
right. That is, for our kids, when we're talking about gangs, quote unquote, it's not a street gang where it's a territorial gang, it's more organized crime, right? So for our kids who are involved in that, it is Arab Matahai, Hayastansi, Parskahai, and the unity that eludes us in
the real institutional
community. Right. They find, right? So,
wow.
So yeah, you got that. And I want to say before we kind of continue, just as a film buff and like a hobbyist editor, I really love your style of filmmaking. I mean, I love it, obviously, for the reasons that it's so close and dear to our community and my own personal experience, but I loved it as a film too, so thank you very much.
You know, Chris, nobody's going to believe that you don't have an Armenian girlfriend, grandmother, something, because you really held up a mirror to an aspect of our lives that we generally don't talk about unless we have a direct, familial, neighbor, causal relationship. And the fact that you mixed the backgrounds, was this accidental? How did you fall into this?
So it's interesting because there's two films that can be seen. If you're American and you don't know much about Armenian culture, you just assume it's about Armenians in general, because most non-Armenians don't even know there's multiple ethnicities with multiple histories of immigration and multiple dialects. But what I was hoping to achieve was to have a film that worked as a story, but also maybe could have another level that maybe people pick up on, maybe not, a metaphorical level, which is just how in this story they come from two different ethnicities of being Armenian, and they become divided by their differences, Arsen and Aram. Then at the end when they're united, to me I hope there's also underneath the story a metaphorical message of that all Armenians, despite their differences that I have seen about from the people I've met, are still united by something really deep as the bond of family at the end of the film.
Takes him to tell us, right? Another myth, that this is really an issue just for immigrants, is that correct? Ara, in your experience, is that right?
So immigration in and of itself can be a risk factor. But as we saw in Aram's life, he had multiple risk factors going on at the same time. He was orphaned, obviously a gigantic risk factor. He immigrated during the age of puberty, which puberty itself can be a risk factor depending on the environment. He was being raised by a grandparent. That's another risk factor. So he had multiple things going on. Now, obviously we have kids in our community that were born here or that came here even much younger than Aram or came here after Aram in terms of their age. So it's about various risk factors. It's not just immigration itself, you know. I've worked with kids exactly like Aram, orphaned, for example. I can think of a specific kid, came here at that age, being raised by grandparents. But in Aram's case, he just had multiple risk factors. You could have a risk factor as simple as having a very bad relationship with one of your parents, even though you have both parents. And then some environmental things happen. You get involved in some, you know, the wrong crowd, so to speak. But yeah, it's just about risk factors. I don't think immigration, just because it's immigration, it just happens to be a risk factor.
I want to ask Chris about mentors, but before that, I want to let Ara Mgrdichian know. I'm going to ask you about class. I wonder if, you know, if at one level this is a, you know, drug, sex, and alcohol issue, and at another level it's a gang attraction issue. Is it a class issue or not? Hang on to that. Let's please talk about mentors and mentorship. Who were the mentors in this film? Was Hagop a mentor?
So, yes, I'd like to just rephrase that for something that the way I think about it, which is instead of mentor, I think of the engine of this film is a boy's search for a father figure. And that father figure doesn't have to be a man, it could be a woman. It's a parent figure that makes you feel safe, that makes you feel like they understand the world and they're strong. And so for me, that's something universal regardless of ethnicity or gender. And that's what drives Aram to make the decisions he makes. When he misunderstands the world around him, he then begins to follow this figure that he believes. He believes Hagop is somebody who will avenge for him, who will protect him, that he is the rightful father figure for him in this world that he doesn't understand. So, and that's what leads him down the wrong path, which could destroy his life. But at the end, I hope the ending indicates, because to me it means that he then has had an epiphany and understood that his rightful father figure is in fact Arsene, his grandfather.
I really think that collectively, had you not given it the ending you had given it, I wonder if we would all be sitting here now, honestly. I mean, I think that you gave us a safe haven to go hide in, even as we hopefully will continue to tackle these questions. Ara, mentors.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Hagop was definitely a mentor to him. I mean, I used to actually, some of the mentors from Gen Next in the room can attest to the fact that I used to use this line, which is the truth. When I was recruiting mentors, I would say, you know, they all get mentors. It's your choice what kind of mentor they get, you know? Because Aram was certainly getting someone who was guiding him. And he wasn't guiding him in the direction we would hope for him to guide him. And, you know, earlier you said Sevak Hakoyan, who, again, an amazing actor who really made Hagop come to life. You said almost likable. So this story, I don't know what the timeline was, but perhaps a year, maybe a little less or a little more in the life of a child, right? If it had started 6 years ago, instead of being the journey of Aram, it would have been the tragedy of Hagop. Because he was an Armenian boy at one point too, you know? He wasn't born involved in, he didn't come out of the womb like that.
Yeah, I'd like to also add that, first of all, that's something we discussed with Sevak, is working out what was his story, how did he end up that way. And he sees, in Aram, he sees himself. Right. And he's trying to create him in his own image. And the other thing is, I think by showing, the intention on our side was to show these things that happened to Aram before, that set him, these risk factors, as you call them, to me is making a very important point, which says two things. One, this is not because he's Armenian that he makes these decisions. This is not because he's a bad kid, because I don't believe there's such a thing as a bad kid. I think life makes kids make bad decisions.
Absolutely.
And that's what I was. That's why I thought it was important to have these elements happen first in his life, to show how he makes decisions because he doesn't understand the right path.
Ara Mgrdichian. Class issues? Are there class issues here?
Absolutely. I think you know that, and everyone sitting there knows that. I think the marginal space of the immigrant, first of all, is where a lot of this negotiation or razbirat is going on. You know, you're throwing a newly immigrated person in with someone who is already owning certain territory. There's machismo, there's territoriality, there's coming of age, all of those things that Aram mentioned. But besides that, I think that it resides in a particular class, but it isn't only class defined. The kids I've worked with, you know, and Ara knows me from Hoover and elsewhere, the same, you know, I'm not going to repeat the things he said because our experience is similar, but I had multiple Arams in my life, and there, you know, there go I, but for the grace of God, I'm an Aram, or everyone could be one. And it isn't strictly, you know, found in the working class, impoverished state, not at all. When you need a tribe, when your family, when your mentor, when your guide isn't existent, either physically or otherwise, you will create your own family. And that's what Aram does. He strives, he's bereft. He strives to find that. And also there are the added issues of class. You have a working class, older man. He comes, these all come together and coalesce into a very high risk or at risk situation.
Thank you. Before I ask you more about the backstory, Chris, can we talk a little bit about numbers? Because I think that, again, this is sometimes so hard to accept that it's easy to dismiss and say, you know, we've got so many problems. Why are we spending this kind of effort talking about, I don't know, 39 kids? Is it fair to say that all of the major high schools in Southern California have this issue? Hollywood High, North Hollywood High, Marshall, Hoover, Glendale, CV. Is this a fair statement?
Yes.
That simple.
Absolutely.
That simple.
I mean, definitely. I mean, you know, Ara knows as well as I do, and there are a few other youth workers here in the crowd. Our Armenian youth are not in this great, spectacular place that we like to think they are.
Although some of them are incredibly
Absolutely.
there. We have valedictorians.
Absolutely. And we have about, I don't know, 10 to 14 private schools in the area. And so we think, you know, we're doing great, we're doing all right. If you add up all the students from those 10 to 14 private schools, there are a very, very small percentage of all of the Armenian youth that reside in the Southland. And we think of the risk behaviors that other youth are involved in, you know, Latino youth, African American youth, Asian youth, American youth, everyone. And we assume that our Armenian youth are not. And another risk factor that I neglected to mention that we see a lot in our community is, so he came from Burjamud, and I think you did an incredible job in a short amount of time with a couple of scenes just demonstrating how beautiful that life was for him there, you know? And the thing is that he lost his parents. Many youth come with their parents, and they come from a community where it was a tight-knit community. It was kind of Armenians to themselves in a broader population where mixing was not as, and it was easy to keep children on track. Not easy per se, but easier in the sense that it was a tight-knit community, and it wasn't just everyone together lost in a world of kind of what we have going on here. Here, it's not as tight-knit. And the individual family needs to be a lot stronger than perhaps it needed to be in a Tehran or a Burjamud or Yerevan or wherever else.
Well, I wanted to also mention something very quickly about what, you know, the more we have become, or the more we have seen ourselves like others, we have the issues of others. You know, you've mentioned in the other schools, in high schools, we, as you well know, I mean, I must say, I know Salpi for a very long time. She in herself is an extraordinary youth advisor. I don't want to go any further, but the point is, the more we have opened up and realized that we have the same issues, and I think what Ara was alluding to is that tight-knitness sort of kept us, you know, we identified ourselves in a particular way and represented ourselves in a particular way. We had a particular lexicon in identifying ourselves. We didn't do this, we didn't do that. And the more that has sort of diluted and has become more real, if you will, or hyper-real for some, we have become who we are, which is humans.
I think maybe we will end with a question to the Aras, and that is that I'm sure there are people sitting here, and there will be people sitting as they watch this video that will be uploaded, saying, Babam, we went through a whole lot of difficulty. My kids didn't do that. What's wrong with them? And I think that that question really needs to be addressed. It's a question that people will ask. Nobody arrived and sat on clouds and, cotton candy for the first 2, 3, 12 years. So what is it that clicks and doesn't click? But before that, tell us backstory. Is there a shoe store? Can I go see Levon? Will he fix my shoes?
The story of where we actually ended up shooting, or
yeah.
Well, funnily enough, so that we shot at Silver Lake, Hyperion Shoe Repair in Silver Lake, which is owned by Jack Hakopian, whose son Peter is here tonight. Thank you for your support, the Hakopian family. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Please. So they support independent film. It's very important.
Thank you.
Los Angeles, it's very difficult to find locations to shoot in that don't try to take all of your money. And this family was very supportive and let us shoot there for a very, very, very small amount of money. I really appreciate it. It's been one of the great joys is meeting the family, in fact.
This is something I wanted to say at the beginning, and I will say it now before we talk about the last issue and pack up, and that is that whatever you thought of the film, whether you give it 110% or 82% or 28%, I think that we owe it to ourselves, not the director and the producers, to ourselves, to pass the word on, support these films, so that the next one gets made. And the one that finally you will like 110%. And that's just a little commercial part. Talk about the exceptionalism. It didn't happen to me. How come?
So, like I said, I think part of the discussion is the multiple risk factors. And okay, it didn't happen for a lot of people. When I was growing up, I was considered quote unquote at-risk youth. I didn't go through all the trials and tribulations, thank God, that Aram did. But as Ara said a little while ago, but for the grace of God, there go I. I mean, if I counted the number of situations where I wouldn't be here with us right now, having this conversation, luck has a lot to do with it, one. But two, it is a confluence of risk factors. Not every kid gets involved in this lifestyle just because they had a parent die, or because they immigrated at a certain age, or because this or that. But when 1, 2, 3, 4 things happens, you have a family member who's involved in criminal activity, you have a substance abuse issue that comes up, X, Y, and Z, things occur, then that's a recipe for it. And you have to have the opportunity. So if you're in an area or a neighborhood or a place where things are going on like that, and then of course there's the generational aspect where people really don't understand. I mean, a lot of adults, we like to look at and say, oh, these kids, they have it so easy nowadays, cell phone, computer, we didn't have this when I was growing up, we didn't have that when I was growing up. You know what? You didn't have street gangs either. You didn't have organized crime. You didn't have heroin. You didn't have, there were so many other things that you also didn't have on the other side. You didn't have all of the pornography in the world available to you in your pocket. You know what I mean? There were so many negative things that you may not have also had access to. So, and then I would just conclude by saying that whole answer I just gave doesn't matter in the following sense. You can say, oh, well, I went through it. How come it's something wrong with them? There aren't enough of us for you to say that. There aren't enough of us for you to blame and go, well, it's outside of my life. It's outside of my house. It's outside of my...
We'll throw a few thousand away. It's okay.
Yeah, we don't have that many to throw away. And plus, your kids are online. Your kids are friends with them because the community isn't as small as it used to be. They're interconnected. So a kid growing up in La Cañada can be a friend of a kid growing up in Little Armenia or a Hakop or someone else.
Ara, anything?
All of that is true. The confluence of factors exacerbates things as you increase them. And I think that family matters greatly because at the root of all of this, a child, whether female or male, is looking for, and it's almost epigenetic, they're looking for guides, they're looking for mentors at a particular age, and that is puberty. And it's true in all, animals. And when that is non-existent, either dad isn't there or mom isn't there, or they might as well not be, but the trauma of, or the trauma of their own childhoods. Remember, everybody was a kid. The kids forget that. They don't know that their parents were 14, that they're still working their stuff out on those kids. And again, we'll come to, and I'm not going to be long-winded, but I want to leave everyone with the notion of transgenerational trauma, which in our case speaks volumes. And I want to talk about and mention that silence, that which is not addressed, speaks the loudest. And don't think your kids don't hear what you're not saying.
Thank you. Chris, you get the last word if you would like it.
Well, in that context, I would say this. The research that I did for this film involved reading up on a lot of people's personal stories that were posted online. There's websites where people would share their stories of coming to Los Angeles, specifically Soviet, post-Soviet immigration to Los Angeles, specifically late 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And what I realized when I was reading about these people who had stories of joining gangs, of coming to Los Angeles, moving into an ethnic neighborhood, the non-Armenian, getting beaten up on the way to school, binding together to protect themselves, and then gangs growing from that, and gangs growing and festering from that, and then preying on their own communities. I realized this is the same pattern that every wave of generation, every wave of immigration is seen in America. The Italians have seen it, the Irish have seen it, the Koreans have seen it. Every group of immigrants has to go through this. Every Latino generation has gone through this, that of trying to find a way to protect yourself, and then it turns into a self-cannibalizing, predatory entity. And so that was my hope, to tell a story through the kids' point of view, was to help to show that there's a logic to it that then goes awry, that it starts with how do I just defend myself. And the beating up scene, that happened to my friend. My friend got beaten up in an underpass walking to school in about 1990 and had his shoes stolen. They weren't like leather shoes, they were probably Air Jordans, but still. And that immediately changed him and the way he viewed the race of the guys that beat him up. And LA was a bit more violent when we were kids than it is now as well.
Thank you. I think that that's one of our challenges at the Institute of Armenian Studies, to try to put our conversations within the global context, in this case the greater Los Angeles context, and at the same time try to understand the specifics of our issues in ways that help us deal with them in the best possible way and move on. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. Please come across the street with us to the Famous, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you,
Ara. Thank you, Ara.
Thank you.